the giant, the powerhouse, the world's leader in size. The country that stretches from the east of Europe all the way to bordering the United States in the west. Really interesting, but it would be much more interesting if we look at the actual habited parts of Russia. While 68% live in the European part, the remaining 32% is mostly divided on the westernmost side of Russia, meaning most of the country is simply empty. So how big would different countries in the world be when we're simply erasing the parts that are barely habited? In this video, we're looking at population densities and populations of countries, and we're asking ourselves the question, how big would these countries really be when we'd erase these so-called useless parts of the countries? Although Russia has been stunning people with their incredible size of more than 17 million square kilometers, most of the country is not habitable, or at least not easily habitable. To be honest, although most of the country is remarkable and filled with unique natural and geographical features, most of Russia is only really useful for the most important thing in the world, oxygen. Around 50% of the country is covered with forests, which is equal to 815 million hectares. Still, while few people are aware of this, it's estimated that 50 to 80% of oxygen actually comes from oceans. Anyway, Russia's harsh environments in most of the country leads to people mostly living in the European part. Just take a look at this map of the population density of Russia. Putting this map side by side with a map of the Siberian part of Russia, we can observe that most of the smaller population density lives in the Siberian part. Going all the way to the east of the country, we can even see large parts under 1 human per square kilometer. The Siberian part of Russia covers approximately 13 million square kilometers, but is only home to 30 million people, meaning they're home to around 2 to 3 people per square kilometer. Enough reason to say that Russia's population size, as I like to call it, would only be around 4 million square kilometers, if excluding the so-called useless part. This would have been larger than India, but smaller than Australia. Now, if we were to move the 30 million people of the Siberian part to the 4 million square kilometers, the country would be home to a population density of roughly 30 to 36 people per square kilometer, comparable to countries like Kyrgyzstan, the United States, and Palau, meaning it would still be a considerably small population density at 147th place in the world. So now that we've erased the more useless parts of Russia, the world map looks like this. Now let's see, which country is going to be the next target? Let's take a look at China. China is the second most populous country in the world with 1.41 billion people. However, although few people know this, large parts of China are almost completely empty. According to some sources like this YouTube channel, Real Life Lore, most Chinese people live on the east side of the country, and according to this channel, even 94% lives east of this line. In 2002, about 94% of the population lived east of the He-Tianxiang line. Although this eastern area comprises only 43% of China's total land area, its population density, at roughly 280 square kilometers, is comparable to that of the United Kingdom, St. Lucia, and Vietnam. The northwest and southwest mountainous, desert, and grassland regions have the fewest people. Parts of the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region are virtually deserted, and only a few sections have population densities more than 10 persons per square kilometer. The Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet autonomous areas, as well as Qinghai and Gansu, account for 55% of the country's land area, but only 5.7% of its population in 1985. Now, we earlier said 94% lives at only 43% of their land area. This is equal to 4,128,000 square kilometers of the country. This is comparable to Russia's size we discussed earlier and India's size of 3,290,000 square kilometers. Another country with very few people but a giant piece of land, and most importantly a giant empty piece of land, is Australia. Consisting mainly of desert, the people are limited in their choices of living. 70% of the Australian population live in the top 8 most populous cities, which include Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Gold Coast, and Newcastle. And these cities are all located at the coast of the country. It's estimated that 95% of the country is simply empty. Just take a look at this map. We can clearly see that only the narrow coastlines are habited and the middle part of the country is empty. It's even worse than that of Siberia, where there were at least 0.1 people per square kilometer. But in the center of Australia, there are only less than 0.1 people per square kilometer. Now, I'm not going to dedicate a whole video to this because we all know why this is: desert. However, let me quickly explain why it's a desert. Well, this is simply because of the Great Dividing Range on the east side of the country. The Great Dividing Range is the 5th longest mountain range in the world and the largest and longest mountain chain in Australia. These mountains, which stretch the length of the eastern edge of the continent from north to south, are so tall that they prevent many Pacific rain clouds from reaching Australia beyond the small area of land between them and the beach. Thus, these mountains throw a rain shadow across the immensity of Australia's interior. And so there's few or no water to live in this 95% of the country. So let's see what happens when we erase this 95%. It means only 5% stay, which is equal to 384,500 square kilometers of the full 7.69 million square kilometers. From the population density it has now, which is 3 people per square kilometer, to the 69 people per square kilometer, comparable to countries like Eswatini, Ecuador, Croatia, Tanzania, Tajikistan, and Ireland. The last one we're looking at today, and this is kind of an obvious one considering the countries we've just done, is Canada. Canada is the second largest country in the world, but one of the most sparsely populated. Did you know around 90% of Canadians live within 200 kilometers of their south border with the United States? This is mostly because the conditions more to the north are harsh, like that of Siberia and Russia. However, there's also another reason most people reside in this small area, which is below this 49th parallel line, the Great Lakes. This is a freshwater lake and is of importance for the population. The Great Lakes are the largest group of freshwater lakes on Earth by total area and are second largest by total volume, containing 21% of the world's surface freshwater by volume. The total surface is 94,250 square miles, 244,106 square kilometers. The Great Lakes are important sources of drinking water, irrigation, transportation, and recreation opportunities such as fishing, hunting, boating, and wildlife watching. They're a critical component of the regional economy on both sides of the border. But why are there very few people in most of the country? The so-called Canadian Shield protects half the country, a vast region of exposed rock with only a thin layer of topsoil, making farming nearly impossible and resulting in bitterly cold winters. Without food, people and civilization simply cannot exist, effectively ruling out the possibility of many large population centers in most of Canada in the future. Instead, Canada, where large-scale farming is genuinely feasible, saw the development of its civilization. And the main reason it's possible is the Great Lakes, which we just talked about. So what if we were to erase the most of Canada? Well, we don't have the exact numbers, but an estimated 80% of Canada is empty, which is equal to 7,984,000 square kilometers. This means we've only got 1,996,000 square kilometers left, which is comparable to countries like Sudan, Indonesia, and Mexico. Their population density would be much bigger with 20 people per square kilometer instead of the 4 people per square kilometer of today. This would give them a density ahead of Uruguay and New Zealand, but behind Britain and Niger. After erasing most of the empty parts of these giant countries, we've come to the conclusion that although the world looks like much, we're really only dependent on small parts of it, and we should be careful with the small pieces we have. Big countries are not always what you think. Although it looks impressive, these countries are not always as powerful as they look. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, like the video and consider subscribing. I'm planning on doing more demographics videos in the future, so share your ideas with me. Anyway, thank you for watching, and as always, see you in the next of Earth Basics.